When people see my images, they would describe them as certainly bright, bold, colourful, and different. And that's exactly what I want them to think. My name's Hicks. I'm originally from the south end of England, from a place called Cornwall, but I've been based just outside of London for the last 10 years now. See, the usual story is, my dad gave me a camera and all that, but I mean, he did, and I used his camera. It was an old Olympus OM1. I still got it to this day, and the thing took great pictures, but I wasn't really passionate about it. It wasn't until, I suppose academically, I failed everything spectacularly. I had plans to go away and do courses and that sort of thing in the UK, and yeah, just didn't get the grades for whatever reason at that age. So I was left with very few choices. So we're talking about 16, when I was 16, and choosing the next path. And my parents were keen for me to stay in education and that sort of thing. So there was very few options open to me apart from an art foundation course that they just brought out. And during that course, fell in love with shooting really, and in the dark room and learning film and taking shots. And the tutor at the time was phenomenal. Yeah, he was so encouraging of just being a bit more creative with it. He was a young guy, surfer dude, really laid back, but he's just really encouraging of just doing things differently, not necessarily doing things right all the time. And that just fueled me. Yeah, just being able to finally being able to do my own thing for a change rather than being regimented all the time. So yeah, that's how I really got into it, fell into it really. That was the only thing that I sort of loved from then on. It was probably at that college, when I was that sort of 17 to 18-year-old in the dark room, just playing with, basically just playing with chemicals, and we would just we'd just lay stuff on photographic paper and put sand on it and all sorts of different shapes and shine light through it and then do things with different chemicals. I just loved that sort of creative process straight away. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then it's such a huge subject to, and I'm sure other subjects are, but photographically for me, there's just so much you can possibly do, and even all these years later, I'm still learning stuff pretty much, every day. I think the whole process of being different became apparent when I got back into photography the second time round. So I left it for a few years and got back into it, like I said, about 2000, 2008. And I tried to, and the only reason why I left shooting back then was because I couldn't do it anymore. Not do it, but I couldn't make a successful living out of it anymore. I didn't adapt, I didn't change to the industry that was changing around me. And I'll put my hands up and say that that is on me. The digital world changed. So yeah, I dropped out of it and traveled around and that sort of thing, got back into it, but I got back into it with a slightly more of a business mindset. How can I do what I love doing again, but be successful at doing it? And social media was obviously massive then, and I was shooting a lot, and I was just sharing images, I suppose, and just doing that. I mean, when you first start out with doing anything, especially in social media, you've got 5 people, one of those is your mum following you, and it's just difficult to get accurate feedback. But slowly over time, people will be like, oh yeah, I love that, I love this. And even though it was stuff that I'd shot years ago, that I'd used colored gels, maybe when I was starting out or back in college, and I would share a shot and people be like, oh yeah, I love that, that's amazing. That's well, I did that years ago. It's not as good as my new work. What's wrong with you? But I think it was because it was different, that people loved it and it stood out to them. So that's really where I went down that route. And I've said time and time again that it's very difficult to be successful unless you're either going to be cheaper than the person next to you, you're either going to be better than the person next to you, or you're going to be different. And photographically, and certainly from a creative standpoint, that's probably the easiest route to be, is just be different. And that's where that style comes from. And that style, clients have to come to you for that. Yeah, I'm a big believer in keeping the skill in the camera, not just on the screen, is what I quote online. And it's a big thing for me because I think anybody who
takes their craft seriously, who is proud of their craft, is going to be like that. But that being said, it's difficult to think of another industry where that happens, where something's falsified, during that process. But getting the images right in camera for me is mandatory, because it gives me the most information and the best possible quality before I even start polishing it. And that's, I know everybody says that, Photoshop and post-pro is really about polishing what's there, and that's crucial. And I think that people who understand that and actually get to grips with that properly will see that their work goes up a gear. Yeah, I suppose I could be called old school, but from that point of view, I like to have the dials and the switches, and I like to get in there. I like to walk around the set. I like to see my set from the light's point of view as well. And I think people say that I'm old school because there's new telemetries and stuff that come out on apps and that sort of thing, and you can control the whole set from where you are. And that's great, and that saves you time if you really push for time, and I can definitely see the benefit of that. But from my point of view, I like to walk around the set, and I like to be where the light is and see what it's doing, and just give me time to think. The teaching side of things sort of came along as a byproduct of what I was doing. So I was shooting images, and like we just said, shooting different images, shooting colourful images, and it's great that people were interested in paying me to do that, but I was just getting deluged by just questions after questions after questions about how things were done. And I think that this is a great time to be alive, where we all have access to so much information, and people aren't afraid to ask. Like back when I was at school and college, or that sort of thing, I would never have just tried to get in touch with a professional photographer to ask questions. Maybe that's just me being a wimp, but maybe it is. But yeah, back then it was like, well, no, you can't do that sort of thing. Whereas now I think it's a generation of people who just get it out there, and just it's really easy to connect with one another. And those questions sort of came about from that, and I found it really exciting. It's really exciting to see these people are just really hungry. So I just enjoy the energy that comes from teaching. If I could offer any advice to people starting out in the industry or wanting to get into the industry, then first and foremost, it's got to be just keep shooting, and then just shoot some more, and then sort of once you've done that, probably shoot a little bit more. And there's no shortcut to that. That is the only thing. Keep shooting.